there's a couple of questions. One kind of came up at lunch about what was happening in China and the relationship between Buddhism and China, and the Chinese government historically. So it's quite interesting because China, like I said, was already a very well-developed culture and sophisticated culture when Buddhism came in. And the government was, they had unified the government because before they had different governments in the north and south. So they had unified the government, and you had the whole Confucian bureaucracy there. The Confucian bureaucracy did not take well to the Buddhists coming in, because they had different beliefs. They were, if the emperor liked them too much, more than the Confucians, there was there was danger to their own power. And even from the side of the emperor, empress, that, because religion has the power really to move a lot of people, they wanted to keep a good watch on what was going on with Buddhism so that the Buddhists didn't get too much power. So it was always a very touchy situation historically in China with trying to please the government and yet not offend anybody. Yeah. So they had to, watch what they were saying and doing. And then on the other hand, when you do that, then it's easy to get drawn into court politics. And so some of the people who were very strong practitioners, especially in the Chan tradition, they didn't want to get drawn into court politics, so they went off into the mountains. And so that's when you get the chop wood, carry water kind of thing, because they wanted to be out of the city where the politics were going on. On the other hand, if you didn't have enough influence in the city with the politics, some faction or another could turn against you and, persecute Buddhism. So it was, always a difficult situation. So you see, as Buddhism went to different countries, according to the politics, the economics, the finances, even the environmental climate of the place, Buddhism had to adapt. So when the Chan practitioners went out into the the mountains to practice, then they couldn't keep the pratimoksha vows about not digging in the earth, not chopping down trees, because they had to, they were so far out that nobody was going to bring them food, so they had to grow their own food. Also, when Buddhism came into China, according to the Chinese culture, it was abhorrent to beg. And even though the monastics are not begging, they're going for alms. There's a difference. Begging is saying, give me something. Alms is you're a spiritual practitioner and you just hold your bowl, and whoever wants to contribute, contributes. So even though they weren't begging, because they were walking through the streets with bowls, people thought they were begging. They looked down on beggars. And so the Buddhists had to stop doing pindapat because they were getting criticized by the authorities, And whereas in India and Southeast Asia, the climate was very hot, and it was perfectly fine for people to have a bare arm. In China, it was considered very uncouth for monastics to show their flesh. And so they changed the robe completely and made it gray or black because those were considered more somber colors. Only the emperor was allowed to wear, a bright saffron color. So they had to change the style. It's, I think, like the Tang Dynasty court people or something like that. They had to change the style, the color, everything to adapt to the culture in China, okay? And then when the nationalist government took over, then again, they were trying to have a strong government, so Buddhism had to get on the good side of that government. Yeah, when the communists took over, then some of the people tried to get on the good side of the communist government and do what they could, and but other people just couldn't do that, and the communists, were very, very hard on the Buddhists, on all religious people, both in China and Tibet. And now, since the end of the Cultural Revolution in the last few decades, then they haven't thrown people out of the monasteries and made the monastics have sex in public and make them wear dunce caps and things like that. But they control who ordains. They control who lives in the monastery. The monasteries are still subject to having re-education programs to make sure that they toe the party line. So still a very delicate situation. So that's why you have some of the protests going on in the Tibetan community, because they feel not only that Buddhism is getting stamped on, but also their whole Tibetan culture. So, and then the Uyghurs, who are Muslims, they have the same kind of difficulties, so there's a lot of unrest there. So, China has always had this thing of we are the 5 races, and we live happily together. But I don't know how happily together, because some of the people want their freedom. Okay. Then in Tibet, what you had is you had little fiefdoms, and then, again, a strong central government came to be, and then the Dalai Lamas became in charge of the government, really beginning, I think, with the 5th Dalai Lama. And the Tibetan philosophy is, if the Dalai Lama, since the Dalai Lama is a holy being, then having him and other monastics and so on in charge of the government will make the government kinder and more compassionate. Yeah. That works and it doesn't work, because you have the monastics who were government monastics, and then the monastics in the monastery. So, they were different. They had different priorities. So the government had governmental monastics, and then it had the nobility. Yeah. And Tibetan history is just amazing. There's one book written by Melvin Goldstein about Tibet history. What was it? From sometime in the 19th century until 1911, somewhere like that. And Gelek Rinpoche contributed a lot to the book. It reads like a murder mystery. Yeah, it's just amazing how power politics went on. So people have this image of the Tibetans as like this enlightened people, and everybody's sweet and practices the Dharma, but that's certainly not the case. Yeah, they have an amazing number of highly realized beings, but they also have a lot of ordinary beings. And so I think that this Shangri-Lazation of Tibet, making it this image of, Shangri-La, has really harmed the Tibetans, especially the Tibetans in exile, because then they kind of play on that. They get used to saying we're poor refugees and relying on the donations from NGOs and other people, when in some communities, not all, but in some, the Tibetans are wealthier than the Indians, and they hire the Indians to work for them. So, that kind of mentality, I don't think on the part of the Westerners and, and then the Tibetans playing along, I don't think that really encourages the development of a strong Tibetan community. I think it weakens it substantially. Okay, so, because I wanted to round that off, because we talked a little bit about the relationship between politics and Buddhism in Thailand and in Burma and Sri Lanka. So, we needed to kind of round that off. Yeah. So here in the West, what's very different is, first of all, having so many different Buddhist traditions present and the people talking to each other. And then also having, the governmental structure is so different that we don't have to, butter up the government in order to exist. We all, expect to have religious freedom. And we kind of take it for granted in a way. Yeah, but it's a really new situation in the history of Buddhism that gives us, a lot of space. Yeah. In India, it's interesting because Buddhism pretty much got wiped out after the Mongol invasion. And then in 1956, one of the Dalits, or untouchables, Dr. Ambedkar, who was also a member of parliament, he thought, the only way to get the Dalits out of, being in the caste system is for them to convert and be Buddhists instead of Hindus. So he did a huge conversion ceremony. There were about 500,000 Dalits who converted to Buddhism in 1956. And so those people now are still trying to get their feet on the ground, They don't have, because they're a poor community, because they still face discrimination. They don't have a proper Buddhist education. They're trying to get one, and different people are going in and helping them, which is really wonderful and admirable. Okay. Then there's a question here. When an arhat is sent to the bodhisattva path, Buddha says, "Thou shalt go to the bodhisattva path." You lazy arhat. No, I don't think it was like that. Okay, so an arhat begins the bodhisattva path. I'm rewording the question. When did they have a direct experience of bodhicitta? Well, I think when the Buddha wakes them up from their meditative equipoise on emptiness, the first thing the Buddha does at that point is instruct them on bodhicitta. And so in order to enter the bodhisattva path, you have to have an experience, a spontaneous experience of bodhicitta. So when the arhats have that, then they officially enter the path of accumulation and begin the accumulation of merit on the bodhisattva path. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, so we're in the middle of speaking about refuge and the difference in how the Buddha's parinirvana and omniscience and so on is seen in the different traditions. So when I reflect on the 3 higher knowledges mentioned in the Pali Sutras, remember the 3 higher knowledges? We covered them when we talked about the 10 powers, because the last 3 of the 10 powers overlapped with the 3 higher knowledges. Remember those? Seeing all your previous lives, seeing sentient beings dying and being reborn, and then knowing the elimination of the obscurations. So when I reflect on the 3 higher knowledges mentioned in the Pali Suttas, I recognize a correspondence with what the Tibetan sage Tsongkhapa later called the 3 principal aspects of the path: renunciation, bodhicitta, and correct view. While these are generated before one becomes a Buddha, they reach their fulfillment at Buddhahood. Okay, so similar with the 5 higher knowledges, they're fulfilled like right before somebody becomes a Buddha. At least that's in the Buddha's life. Some of them, the seeing the previous lives and sentient beings born, you can do that before, but again, not reaching fulfillment until awakening. With the first higher knowledge, the Buddha saw his previous lives, their dukkha and transience. Knowing all that misery was caused by afflictions and karma, he responded with full renunciation of samsara, making the determination to attain liberation. It's interesting. In the Pali tradition, when you meditate on the, impermanence and the disadvantages of samsara, instead of saying you generate renunciation, which they take to mean as renouncing sense pleasures, not renouncing all of samsara, you generate something called samvega, which is often translated as urgency. Yeah, so you meditate on the faults of cyclic existence, and what arises in you is this feeling of urgency to practice in order to be free of cyclic existence. So it's a similar kind of thing to renunciation, but it's a different word and a slightly different emphasis. Although certainly, renunciation has a sense of urgency to it. Okay. With the second higher knowledge, he saw the passing away and rebirth of sentient beings under the influence of afflictions and karma. His reaction to this horror was impartial love, compassion, and bodhicitta. To fulfill this altruistic commitment, he freed his mind of all pollutants and obscurations by realizing the correct view of the subtle selflessness of persons and phenomena. Okay, so do you see how the three higher trainings, they map very nicely with the three principal aspects of the path. Through repeatedly using this wisdom to cleanse his mind, he gained the third knowledge and knew that his mind was totally purified and that he had attained nirvana. Okay. Both Pali and Sanskrit traditions speak of ours being a fortunate eon in which Gautama Buddha is the fourth wheel-turning Buddha to appear, and Maitreya will be the fifth. Wheel-turning Buddhas are those who give teachings when and where the Dharma is not otherwise known. According to the Pali tradition, these Buddhas are the only Buddhas in our world during this eon. Other practitioners will become arhats. Okay. According to the Sanskrit tradition, every sentient being has the potential to become a Buddha, and there are many Buddhas in our eon. Okay, so there's a difference there about who can become an eon. The Pali traditions say only the wheel-turning Buddhas are Buddhas. Everybody else becomes an arhat. Sanskrit tradition says everybody can become a fully awakened Buddha. Okay? Then taking refuge and maintaining proper refuge. I believe that there can be different levels of refuge in the three jewels, and people may take refuge at a level comfortable and appropriate for them. This helps them on their spiritual path and encourages them to continue learning and practicing the Buddha's teachings. For some people, a comfortable level of refuge involves appreciating the teachings on love and compassion. For others, it includes belief in rebirth. What is important is that they trust and respect the three jewels. So this is His Holiness's open-minded inclusiveness. Typically you would have to actually think of attaining liberation from samsara. Understanding samsara involves understanding repeated rebirth. Yeah, and so following the Buddha's teachings to attain liberation, you would think that somebody would believe in rebirth in order to understand what samsara was, in order to want to be free of it, or to want to become a Buddha in order to free others from it. His Holiness, I think because he speaks to so many different audiences, and so many people are really drawn to the teachings in the Nalanda tradition about bodhicitta and loving kindness and so on. So he makes it broader so that people, if they want to take refuge and call themselves Buddhist without believing in rebirth, they certainly can. Okay? But he also leaves it open that if they're followers of another religion, it's perfectly fine for them to practice that religion and then use techniques that they learn from Buddhism to help them in the practice of their original religion. Yeah, so he's quite open in that way. Within the context of the Buddhist worldview that accepts rebirth, there are several causes for taking refuge. One is alarm at the possibility of taking unfortunate rebirth. So that alarm is an immediate cause leading us to seek refuge in the three jewels. You know, when you think you've meditated on impermanence and death, death could come. It's certain it could come at any time, you know, and your rebirth, you have no idea what rebirth you're going to. You've kind of looked at the karma you've created in your life, and you go, I need help fast. So there's a sense of alarm. So that alarm, you know, can be a strong motivating factor to seek refuge, you know, to go to the Buddha Dharma Sangha to learn how to deal with our predicament and prevent a bad rebirth. Yeah, at the minimum, or prevent rebirth in samsara altogether. Okay. So alarm at the dukkha of pervasive conditioning spurs us to seek refuge in them to guide us out of samsara. Okay. Then second cause, is understanding the qualities of the three jewels and their ability to guide us. We will generate faith and confidence in them that is based on knowledge. So here's the reason, you know, why we study all the qualities of the three jewels in great depth. Because by knowing their qualities and understanding their qualities, then we're able to have a kind of faith that is based on knowledge and learning, not just blind belief. And then third, this is for Mahayana refuge, with compassion, those who follow the Bodhisattva yana take refuge in the three jewels to attain full awakening so that they will be able to alleviate the dukkha of fellow sentient beings. Okay? Sometimes I use the word Mahayana to mean Bodhisattva yana. Actually, that's a little sloppy on my tradition, on my part. So, don't always, sometimes when I say that, hear Bodhisattva yana instead of Mahayana. Okay. It is important to reflect on the qualities of the three jewels, the reasons for taking refuge in them, so those three reasons, and the meaning of doing so. So what does it mean to take refuge? Does it mean just saying, I believe? Count me in, I believe? You know, what does taking refuge mean? Yeah. So it really means relying on the three jewels for our spiritual guidance. And so having the, what we often talk about is seeing ourselves as a sick person. We go to the Buddha, who's like a doctor, who diagnoses the illness of samsara and its cause, ignorance, prescribes the medicine of the Dharma. We have to take the medicine, and then the Sangha helps us take the medicine. So, I think it's a very good analogy so that we really understand what taking refuge is about. Yeah, it's not just I believe and, I call myself a Buddhist and this kind of thing. Okay, so having done that, when in our hearts we entrust our spiritual guidance to the three jewels, because we recognize them as reliable sources of refuge, we have found the real meaning of taking refuge and have become a Buddhist. Okay, so did you get that? He just gave you the answer there of what it means to take refuge. However, even without becoming Buddhists, people can practice the teachings that help them in their lives and leave the rest aside for the moment. Okay? Some people wish to affirm their refuge in the three jewels by participating in a ceremony in which they recite the refuge formula after a spiritual mentor and take some or all of the 5 lay precepts. These 5 are to abandon killing, stealing, unwise and unkind sexual behavior, lying, and taking intoxicants. Okay? So it's interesting in the Theravada tradition, they don't, or at least the Theravadas that I know in Singapore and Malaysia, they don't have a formal ceremony of taking the precepts, but what they do is every morning, or at least whenever they go to the temple, they recite the 5 precepts together to reaffirm them. Okay? So I don't know how many people keep them during the day because they don't take them in a formal ceremony. Maybe repeating them at the temple is, kind of reinforces that in their minds. I'm not quite sure, but it's good in any case. Yeah. After taking refuge, people follow guidelines to help them maintain and deepen their refuge. So this is according to the Sanskrit tradition, although I don't think that anything in it would contradict what's in the Pali tradition. So these guidelines include to avoid harming sentient beings, criticizing whatever we dislike, being rough and arrogant, running after desirable objects, engaging in the 10 non-virtues, taking refuge in worldly spirits or gods, and cultivating the friendship of people who criticize the 3 jewels or who act in non-virtuous ways. Okay, so in our we have the refuge card that people get when they take refuge here at the Abbey. So these guidelines are all written out in a more expanded version in that card. And these are the kind of guidelines that you train your mind in, because if you do that, then it prevents your refuge from declining and enables you to really maintain it and to deepen it. And it certainly helps you stop creating so much negative karma. But some of them are hard, aren't they? Yeah, to stop criticizing whatever we dislike, stop being rough and arrogant, stop running after desirable objects. It's a few words, but it's a pretty advanced practice, isn't it? When you think of it, when you really try and keep these, not easy. Okay, but when we do, we can see how it affects our mind in a very positive way. We also do our best to follow a qualified spiritual mentor, study and put the teachings into practice in our daily life, respect members of the Sangha and follow their good examples, be compassionate to other sentient beings, take the 8 one-day precepts twice a month, make offerings to the 3 jewels, encourage others to take refuge in the 3 jewels, take refuge 3 times each morning and evening, offer our food before eating, and respect Buddhist images and Dharma books. When all these guidelines are listed in phrases one after the other, it sounds very different than when you read each one individually, doesn't it? Yeah? When you read each one individually and explain it, you can take it in a little bit more. It makes sense. One after the other, they're like, whoa, there's a lot to be aware of here. Okay? And quite important things. One guideline for maintaining pure refuge is not to turn to other objects of refuge that lack the ability and the qualities to guide us to awakening. Buddha Shakyamuni is our teacher, and an image of Buddha Shakyamuni should be at the front center of our altar. Yeah, His Holiness comments from time to time that he'll go into certain small temples or, places like that, and instead of having the Buddha at the center, they'll have Chenrezig or somebody else at the center. And so even though it's a Buddhist deity, His Holiness says you should always have the Buddha at the center. So in our Kuan Yin room, the big statue is Kuan Yin, but above Kuan Yin, there's a statue of the Buddha. Same thing in my room. I have a large statue of Chenrezig. Above that, there's a statue of the Buddha. Here we have the Buddha, yeah? So he really emphasizes that the Buddha is our teacher. And even though there's all these other deities and things going on, we have to remember that the Buddha's the originator and founder, okay? And we rely on his teachings. We entrust our entire spiritual well-being to the Buddha. If we feel remorse for acting harmfully, we confess and purify in the Buddha's presence. We generate virtuous aspirations to become like the Buddha and his Sangha in the Buddha's presence. Okay? Most Buddhist traditions speak of Dharma protectors, beings who help practitioners on the path. These Dharma protectors may be supramundane or worldly. Supramundane protectors have directly realized emptiness and are included in the Sangha refuge. In the Tibetan context, protectors such as the four great kings, so these are the four kings, they're actually devas from one of the god realms. You see them before you go into a monastery. Usually on the door you'll have the wheel of life, and on either side you'll have two of these four great kings. Okay, so they're Dharma protectors. So protectors such as the four great kings and Nechung. So Nechung is one of the. It's actually a group of 5 deities who Padmasambhava subdued, when they were bringing Buddhism to Tibet. And that's the thing, when Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, subdued these spirits, he made them promise to protect the Dharma. So he converted them from being malevolent into being Dharma protectors. So Nechung is one of those. It's a group of 5. Does it go into it here? No. So in Dharamsala, there's a Nechung monastery, and there's a Nechung oracle. Okay? So there's one monk who goes into trance and channels Pehar, who's one of the Nechung deities. So different lamas will consult the Nechung oracle. Sometimes the Tibetan government will consult with the Nechung oracle about important decisions. And so he will go into trance, and then he gives them the answer. It's quite something. I've been there when the Nechung oracle has gone into trance. This is very much tied to Tibetan culture, but he wears special clothes, and then as soon as he goes into trance, the monk is very sweet. And on Working with Anger, the part on the cover, the part of the monk's face, that's the present Nechung oracle. So but his whole face changes and becomes quite wrathful. And they put this enormous headdress on him. You may have seen pictures of it. It weighs like 30 pounds, and he will dance around the room and do a lot of dances, and then asks the questions and he gives the answers and continues kind of dancing and moving around the room. And then when when Pehar leaves, immediately his attendants have to catch him. Otherwise, the weight of that headdress would snap his neck and break his neck. So it's actually quite dangerous for the medium, to channel like that. That's very much part of Tibetan culture. It's he's considered a worldly deity, but as a protector of the Tibetan government. Okay, deities like Pelden Lamo Pelden Lamo is considered an Arya Bodhisattva, so she would also be included in the Sangha Refuge as an Arya Bodhisattva. Okay, so when we visualize the tree of assembled gurus, okay, the supramundane protectors, will be on the lotus, because all the figures that are on the lotus that's going down over the tree, they're all Arya beings. And then below that, you'll see the 4 guardian protectors who are worldly beings. Yeah, and so it says that when we're reading the description in Lama Chopa, it talks about that. Okay. Okay, so the 4 great kings in Nechung are worldly beings who have made promises to great masters, such as Guru Rinpoche, to protect the Dharma and to protect practitioners. They are not included in the 3 jewels. We may rely on them for temporal help for virtuous purposes, in the same way we rely on a powerful person to help us in a time of need. However, we do not seek spiritual refuge in them. Yeah? Okay, so you can go to help with them, because Tibetans, they all believe in these spirits. For Westerners, some people do, some people don't. It's not so much in our culture as it is in their culture. But so you might go to these spirits for some worldly help, but you don't take refuge in them, and you don't ask them for spiritual direction. Yeah, but you treat them like powerful people who might be able to help you when you're in a jam. So spirits are samsaric beings. Yeah, this is quite important. Because you have in the West, there's a lot of people who do seances and trances and channeling and all of that. So yeah, it's in our culture too, definitely. So spirits are samsaric beings. Like human beings, some spirits are helpful and others are harmful. Some have clairvoyant powers, others do not. Yeah. Some have virtuous qualities, while others are angry and spiteful. Yeah? So don't think that just because, there's some kind of spirit that can tell you this, that, or the other thing, that they're necessarily telling you the truth or have your best intentions in mind. That's what His Holiness is saying here. Due to ignorance, some people turn to local spirits and spirits such as Dorje Jukden for refuge. Because these beings help only in temporal ways, practitioners' motivations degenerate, and instead of seeking awakening, they seek wealth or power through pleasing the spirit. This corrupts their Dharma practice and runs counter to the Buddha's teachings, in which the Buddha clearly stated we are responsible for creating the causes for happiness by abandoning destructive actions and creating constructive ones. Refuge in the 3 jewels and following the law of karma and its effects are the real protection from dukkha. So what His Holiness has seen, happen in the Tibetan community is when you have these spirits, and ones such as Jukden, some people see as an emanation of a Buddha, They don't see him as a spirit. His Holiness is quite clear that Jukden is a spirit. Then they take refuge in these beings, but because these spirits are more interested in worldly affairs, wealth, power, reputation, and all, then the people who get really involved in doing those practices, their motivations degenerate because they start propitiating the spirit and asking for all their worldly wishes to be fulfilled. Yeah. In the case of Jukden, what happened is that this spirit started threatening people who were Galupa practitioners if they studied teachings from the Nyingma tradition or some other tradition. Now, His Holiness, he's no longer the political head of Tibet, but until a few years ago he was, and he is still the symbolic leader, now, even though he doesn't have any political power. So for His Holiness, having a whole group of people who are developing a very sectarian stance because of worshiping this spirit, it goes completely counter to the harmony that is so desperately needed in the Tibetan community now that they are refugees. Yeah. The Tibetan community has always had a hard time staying united. They split into, their religious traditions. They split into their area traditions, if you're from central Tibet or Amdo or Kham. In Tibetan history, whenever there was some dispute over power, one or the other or both of the parties would call on either the Mongols or the Chinese or some other foreign power to come in and back them when they're, trying to get the political power in Tibet. So what His Holiness is trying to do is, the refugees, they need to remain united. So having any kind of sectarian influence is just, it's disastrous for the Tibetan people. Yeah. And so he really spoke out against people doing this practice for those reasons. Yeah. So the people who protest what His Holiness say, I've seen their protests at many of His Holiness's teachings. I don't quite understand exactly what it is they're protesting, because they usually chant, false Dalai Lama, stop lying, give us religious freedom. So false Dalai Lama, that I don't understand. His Holiness was recognized by the usual means in Tibetan culture. Stop lying, I'm not sure what they're accusing His Holiness of lying about. Yeah, I haven't seen that explained anywhere. And then when they say give us religious freedom, they actually have religious freedom, especially the people who live in the West. They can, His Holiness said, if you're my student, don't do this practice. But people have freedom to choose to be His student or not. And if they choose to do that practice, they live in India, they live in the West, they have religious freedom, they can do it. Nobody's stopping them. So it's quite puzzling to me, and it makes me very sad, and especially when I see Westerners involved in this, because this is completely a Tibetan issue. It has nothing to do with us. There's no reason for Westerners to be involved in it. Yeah, so I think the whole thing basically just gives people a bad taste. It makes Buddhism look quite bad, and it's really very sad. Yeah, quite sad. And I have no idea what kind of karma people are creating anger never creates positive karma, so I don't know what kind of karma they're creating. Okay. So the real thing that protects us from suffering is not propitiating a Dharma protector. Even the transcendental Dharma practitioners, the super mundane ones, if you're going to them just so I can have wealth and this thing, that's not the proper motivation. Yeah? So, His Holiness often says, because the Tibetans, and the whole thing about spirits is very much in their culture, spirits and all sorts of other beings. So he'll tease them because in their homes they'll have an altar, and they have the Buddha and the different deities up here, and then there's cabinets under the altar where they put all their precious belongings. And His Holiness says, it looks like you're praying to the people above the cabinets to protect your possessions below the cabinets, or in the cabinets. But what about your Dharma practice? Where are you practicing the Dharma? Okay, so he really wants people to practice and not get distracted by these other kinds of things. Worldly people often look for external things such as amulets, blessed water, and protection strings to protect them from danger. If these things help them to remember the Buddha's teachings and practice them, that is fine. But if they think that these objects possess some inherent power from their own side, they are mistaken. In fact, human beings need to protect the amulets, strings, and so forth because they are so easily damaged. True, isn't it? We must always remember that Dharma practice occurs in our minds. True practice entails identifying our afflictions and applying antidotes to them. Okay, so now we're on chapter 3. We're moving along. Which is about the 16 attributes of the Four Truths. So the Four Truths of the Aryas, in Pali, commonly known as the Four Noble Truths, form the framework for understanding all of the Buddha's teachings. Contemplating them deeply motivates us to seek liberation and enables us to understand how the practices we do lead to liberation. Both the Pali and Sanskrit traditions speak of 16 attributes of the Four Truths. Although the list of 16 differs in the two traditions, there are differences in their subtle meaning. Their overall meaning is similar. So His Holiness was very emphatic, in the book, you have to have not just the Four Noble Truths, but the 16 attributes of the Four Noble Truths from both sides. He said that many, many times. And what's interesting is that the lists are not the same of the 16 attributes. They're actually quite different. Of course, the meaning in one and the meaning in the other, when you're looking at the long-term meaning and the layout, they match up pretty well. But the 16 are quite different. Yeah? So I don't think that they come from the sutras. I mean, in fact, in the Sanskrit tradition, Vasubandhu's Abhidharma Akosha and Dharmakirti's Pramanavartaka explain that each of the Four Noble Truths has 4 attributes that counteract 4 distorted conceptions about that truth. So, I haven't found a sutra reference for the 16 attributes from the Sanskrit tradition. I'm not sure about the Pali. Let me just skip ahead. I don't remember finding one in the Pali either. Yeah, it was also the Patita Sambhidhamagga, a work ascribed to Shariputra in the Sutta Pitaka, that explains it. So it's ascribed to Shariputra. It's in the sutra basket, but I think it is a later, it might be, well, if it's Shariputra, then it's supposed to be, the time of the Buddha, but it'd be interesting to research that text and see when it became widespread. Okay, so the 16 attributes explain the truths according to their different functions and demonstrate the existence of liberation and the method to attain it. Okay, so each of the four truths has four attributes to it, and these four attributes dispel four wrong conceptions about that truth. Okay, so the four attributes of true dukkha. Okay, so true dukkha, or in English, the truth of dukkha, you can say it either way, is the polluted aggregates: body, feelings, discriminations, volitional factors, also translated as compositional factors, and consciousness. Polluted means under the control of afflictions, especially ignorance and karma. Internal true dukkha is in the continuum of the person and includes our bodies and minds. External true dukkha includes the things in our environment that we use and enjoy. Okay, so the five aggregates are given as the example of true dukkha. So in each of these, of the four concerning true dukkha, there's like a syllogism, and it starts out with the aggregates, So they're used as the example because they're the big illustration. When people say, what is samsara? It's our polluted body and mind. It also includes the things of our environment, but we shouldn't think that the things in our environment are the real samsara, and to get out of samsara we need to move someplace else, because as long as we take our polluted body and mind with us, it doesn't matter where you move to, you're still in samsara. Okay. Our physical and mental aggregates are specified as examples of true dukkha because they are the direct product of afflictions and karma. The right direct product, okay? In addition, they form the basis of designation of the I or self. So the aggregates are something that's very important because the self, the I, is the most important thing to each of us, and our most important possessions are our aggregates. Okay. Now here, there's a little detour explaining an important point. So the word self has different meanings depending on the context. So the first is the self in the fourth attribute, of true dukkha, refers to the object of negation of the wisdom realizing reality. Okay, so the object of negation may refer to a permanent self or soul, a self-sufficient, substantially existent person, or the inherent or independent existence of all phenomena. And an example is when you say all phenomena are empty of self, then self is what doesn't exist, the object of negation. Or when you say the selflessness of persons and phenomena, okay, selfless, the lack of that whatever object you're negating in persons and phenomena, okay? So here, selfless does not mean the opposite of selfish. It means not self, yeah? So just trying to clarify the English, because the English can get confusing, yeah? And then the second meaning of self can refer to the conventionally existent person or I who walks, meditates, gets reborn, attains liberation, and so forth. So we have to see these different meanings of the word self according to context. Otherwise, we get very confused when we read things. Okay, so now we're going into the 4 attributes. Yeah. So first, the polluted aggregates are impermanent. So impermanent is the attribute. Yeah. Because they undergo continuous momentary arising and disintegration. Okay, so it's expressed very nicely in syllogisms here. Okay, the polluted aggregates are impermanent. Why? Because they undergo continuous momentary arising and disintegration. So understanding this dispels the distortion believing impermanent things are permanent. Okay, so impermanent here means changing by moment by moment. Okay, all conditioned phenomena undergo change, disintegrating from what they were and becoming something new. Coarse change occurs when a thing ceases. A person dies, a chair breaks. Subtle change occurs moment by moment. It is the things not remaining the same from one instant to the next. Okay. So our senses observe coarse impermanence. However, for something such as our body to be born and cease in this obvious way, there must be a more subtle process of change taking place each moment. Without it, the coarse observable changes from childhood to old age could not occur. Okay, so there's coarse and subtle impermanence, yeah? Coarse impermanence is when the continuum of something ceases, like the person dies, the building falls down, okay? Your exams are over, whatever it is, okay? And subtle impermanence occurs moment by moment, and it's this subtle change that we cannot perceive by our senses. It has to be perceived by a yogic direct perceiver, by a special mental consciousness that has very deep concentration to perceive the subtle impermanence. But the point is here that we cannot have gross impermanence unless on every nanosecond, or whatever is smaller than the nanosecond, things were changing moment by moment. Okay? So the example is the sun rising and the sun setting. Those are examples of gross impermanence. But the sun couldn't arise and then later set and then later arise again. There was momentary change every single, infinitesimally small moment of the earth moving, yeah, so that the sun came to rise and then later set and then rise again. Okay, and so the same thing for a human being. We start out as infants, so birth is like a course change. There's no baby and bam, there's one. And then, of course, it was coming over time, but yeah, still a surprise, I think, when you have it. And then the course impermanence when somebody dies. Okay, now how could you have a baby and then the death of somebody without every single moment the person aging, going towards death? Yeah, and so this happens on the infinitesimally small momentary level. Okay. Almost all Buddhists accept that the moment a thing comes into being, it has the nature of disintegrating simply by the fact that it was produced by causes. Okay? It is not the case that a cause produces something, that something remains unchanged for a period of time, and then another condition causes its cessation. Okay, this is quite important. Rather, the very factor that causes something to arise also causes it to cease. So impermanence is built into conditioned phenomena. It's not something added on extra, but it's the very nature of conditioned phenomena. Okay? From the very moment of a thing's existence, it has the nature of disintegrating. Momentariness indicates that arising and ceasing are not contradictory, but are two attributes of the same process. So every time something is arising, something is ceasing. Yeah, exactly. We usually think something's created. It stays as it is, permanent for a while. And then, surprise, something happens to it, and it ends. And so often we are surprised at the end of something. You know, like when somebody dies, how did that happen? You know? We're so surprised at impermanence, even though we live in the midst of it. Yeah? When you fall in love, you think, I'm in love forever. Ever and ever and ever and ever, and it's not going to change. And this person's feelings for me are never going to change. Yeah? Is that true? Even if your relationship endures, which over 50% of them do not endure nowadays, is the relationship exactly the same? The first year and the 5th year and the 25th year? No. Okay. So, but yet it's so interesting. You know, at the beginning when you fall in love, you think it's permanent, it's everlasting. Don't we? It's never going to change. My feelings are never going to change. Their feelings are never going to change. Yeah, we're going to live happily ever after. And yet, if people ask us, do things change moment by moment? We say, oh, yes. But somehow our feelings and our relationships aren't supposed to. Yeah. So we have some ignorance here, don't you think? Yeah? That somehow what we know up here doesn't influence how we feel down here and how we live down here. We have a totally wrong conception, you know, and that wrong conception makes us suffer, doesn't it? Yeah? Haven't we all been in love and then the relationships ended? I think that's happened to everybody here, huh? And yet, why are we so surprised when that happens? You know? That's because of our ignorance. Yeah? It really shows us the depth of our ignorance and how we suffer because of ignorance. Ignorance is a total setup for suffering. Yeah? An excellent example of it. Okay. The present is insubstantial. You could meditate a long time on that statement. Okay. But the present seems so real, doesn't it? Isn't this the same table as we've had here exactly from the beginning of the course? Isn't it the same gong? It doesn't look any different. And the same recorders, and you and me are exactly the same. Weather changes a little bit, but everything else is the same. Yeah, doesn't it feel like that? Like we're all exactly the same. And yet, if we were exactly the same as on the first day of the course, then we would not have learned anything since the course began. Of course, that may be true anyway. But hopefully, something has gone in. Okay. Yeah, we're not exactly the same as at the beginning. So the present is insubstantial. It is an unfindable threshold between the past, which is what has already happened, and the future, which is yet to happen. Okay? So when you think, what is the present? It's that very, when is the present? Yeah, it's all the time, but when can you find it? Because each present moment very quickly becomes the past. A moment before it's the present, it's the future. Then next moment it's the past and it's totally gone. So it's very strange, okay? While we spend a great deal of time pondering the past and planning for the future, neither of them is occurring right now. The only time we ever live is in the present, but the present is elusive, changing in each nanosecond. We cannot stop the flow of time to examine a fixed present moment. So when you're meditating and you're trying to, examine the present, it certainly would be nice if time could hold still. So you could look at the present moment, have enough time to look at the present moment. But the present moment is quickly becoming the past, like this. And yet you're always in the present moment. Yeah. Although our mind, which is in the present moment, is often thinking about things in the past or in the future, which are not happening right now. But we can't find that present moment. Yeah. Just sit and watch in your meditation sometime. Try and find that present moment. Yeah. Understanding impermanence is a powerful antidote to harmful emotions based on grasping impermanent things, such as our dear ones, possessions, moods, and problems, as permanent. Do not fall into nihilism, thinking that nothing is worthwhile because it will change. Rather, because things are transient, attachment and anger toward them is impractical. What a word. He's saying, you're practical people. Being attached and getting angry at things that are changing every single moment is completely impractical, because you're getting mad at what is no longer the case. And even your anger and even your attachment aren't standing still. They're changing each moment. Okay? So it's impractical getting involved in attachment and anger, because what you're mad at and what you're attached to doesn't exist in the next moment. So what are you getting so revved up about? Okay? Rather, because things are transient, attachment and anger towards them is unpractical. Impermanence also means, good side of impermanence, also means that when we create the causes, our positive qualities such as love, compassion, and altruism will grow. Yeah. So while we often see impermanence as a negative attribute of samsara, because the whole thing is that no object in samsara can provide us lasting security, because it's changing moment by moment. Okay? So we usually see impermanence as it's indicative of the unsatisfactory nature of samsara. But from another perspective, impermanence is something good because we can become Buddhas. If we were permanent, we could never become Buddhas. Everything would be frozen. Yeah, our bad moods would never change. So on that level, it's kind of good things are impermanent. Yeah. So the Pali Suttas describe impermanence as arising and passing away. Occasionally they speak about knowing things as they arise, as they are present, and as they pass away, outlining three phases: arising, changing while abiding, and disintegrating. The Abhidhamma agrees with this formalization. Meditators focus on the sutra presentation of arising and passing away, and within that, especially on passing away, because that forcefully highlights impermanence. Yeah, if you focus on passing away, yeah, it's gone, it's gone, it's gone, it's gone, yeah. Practicing mindfulness, meditators pay close attention to physical and mental processes, coming to see that what appears to be unified objects or events are in fact processes that arise and cease in each moment due to causes and conditions. As mindfulness deepens, subtle impermanence is seen clearly with direct experience by a yogic direct perceiver. Okay? So we see things as a unified object, like this is one gong that is permanent. In fact, it's made of many parts, and each part is changing moment by moment by moment. Okay? Seeing impermanent things as permanent adds to that solidity of seeing them as one thing. Okay? So even our body, even though it's impermanent and changing, we so often see our body as just one unified thing, and it's permanent. It's just there. Yeah. But when we think about it for even 2 seconds, it's made of parts, and it's something that's constantly changing. So seeing arising dispels annihilation, or nihilism, the notion that things do not exist at all, or that the continuity of the person and of the effects of karma totally stop at death. Seeing disintegration dispels eternalism, the notion that people and things have a substantial, permanent, eternal reality. So even impermanence dispels the two extremes. Okay, so there's a lot to meditate on here. Okay, so may I suggest that this evening and tomorrow morning you spend your time, on refuge and on this, on permanence. And then in your next discussion group, I think to have a discussion group specifically on refuge and on how you use refuge to deal with problems such as health problems. Because we all have a body, our body all, gets sick. It's one day going to go bye-bye, So often we react to our health problems with fear, worry, and anxiety. So you have the physical suffering, the physical health problem. Then you have the mental fear, worry, and anxiety, which is a whole different dimension of suffering. And sometimes the mental suffering is greater than the physical suffering. Sometimes the mental suffering causes or enhances the physical suffering, because when we're tense, when we're anxious, things hurt more. And our body, it's harder for our body to heal. So have in your discussion group, share your experiences, how you use refuge, especially refuge in the Dharma, to deal with, with having a body that gets old and sick and dies, yeah, and how to deal with the mind's fear and worry and anxiety about that. Okay, because we'll definitely have problems with the body as soon as we're born with a body under the influence of ignorance. For sure, it will get sick. For sure, it will get old. For sure, it will die. Why are we so surprised when that happens? Because it doesn't fit into our version of reality, which is pretty unreal. Okay? So it's very helpful. How can we bring our practice to this kind of situation and use our refuge? Okay?